Hello everyone, MTG Sly Guy here with another Magic the Gathering deck tech for the Kaladesh Season of Standard. Today I'm going to be bringing you a Naya mid-range Planeswalker deck that I built about 5 weeks ago. So far I've taken it to 3 events, 1 FNM and 2 Standard Showdowns. I'm 11-1 with the deck, and I won both of these Showdown events that I attended, so I figured I would share it with you today. And hopefully you guys can try it out and get as much enjoyment out of it as I have. Starting off with the land base, we have 2 mountains, 2 plains, 2 forests, and 1 wastes for the basic lands. Next up we have 3 evolving wilds, 4 Aether Hub, 4 Needle Spires, which is the most important land in the deck. Arguably the best mana land in Standard right now. I think maybe Shambling Events might have something to say about that, but yeah, it's super good. 3 Game Trails, 2 Fortified Villages, 1 Canopy Vista, and finally 2 Cinderglades, for a total of 26 lands. Moving on to the creatures. First off, a full playset of Sylvan Advocate, probably the most important land or creature in the deck. Goes really well with Needle Spires and synergizes really well with Nissa and Arlen Court. It is a full playset. Next up, a card you don't see a lot of in the standard constructed format, but with the mana bases being so good lately, I figured I would pull him out of the old trade binder because he's super good and he should see more play than he does. He's Value City. Woodland Wanderer is 3 colors, 1 green for 2/2 with Vigilance and Trample, but it has Converge, and for each color of mana spent to cast him, he gets an additional 1/1 counter. So I'll typically, he's coming out as at least a 5/5, usually 6/6 Vigilance Trample for 4, because I'll spend green, red, white, and then I'll tap an Aether Hub for a blue or a black, and he's a 6/6 Vigilance Trample for 4 mana, and yeah, super good. He does a lot of work for me. He's a 2/0. Next up, another super value city creature. Verdur's Gearhulk, 3 colors, 2 green for a 4/4 trample, and when he enters the battlefield, you can distribute 4 1/1 counters among any number of creatures you control. So worst case scenario, he's an 8/8 trample for 5 mana. Decent. There's also a 2/0. Next up, the Red Gearhulk, Combustible Gearhulk, 6 mana, 6/6 for strike, and when he enters the battlefield, your opponent chooses to either let you draw 3 cards or you mill the top 3 cards, and they lose life equal to the combined CMC of the cards. Really good. Refills your hand late game. More often than not, they'll let you draw the cards because in this deck, their life totals are usually under attack pretty early on. It's not that it's a super aggressive deck, it's just that this deck can take large chunks of life in a hurry. I'll elaborate on that a little more later on after I show you the deck list. So 2 Compulsive Gearhulks, and finally for creature spells we have 2 World Breakers, 6 mana, 5/7 Reach to Void. When it enters the battlefield, you can exile artifact, enchantment, or land, which is super relevant in the current meta. Gets rid of Sky Sovereigns, gets rid of Aetherworks Marvels, gets rid of Paramonicon, Dynavolt Tower. It does get rid of Smuggler's Copter, but it's a little late game to really be dependable for that, but it does. If you happen to be able to play it in a situation where they have a Copter out, he will get rid of the Copter. And exiling is super relevant, especially if you're playing against somebody who has the Dredge, the Scrap Heap Scrounger, I believe it's called. A lot of people are using that as a way of getting Prize Amalgam out of their graveyard, and being able to exile, one of their ways of doing that is very, very effective. It is a 2/0. And obviously, of course I should say, I don't want to leave out the recursion ability. 2 colorless and 1 wastes, sacrifice a land, and return World Breaker from your graveyard to your hand. So he does have recursion if he does happen to get removed or put in your graveyard. That is it for the creatures. There's a total of 12 creatures in the deck. Moving on to the non-creature spells. We have... and again, sorry for the glare. Where I am right now, it's dark, and I have to rely on the overhead light. And also, I'm filming with my iPod, and it doesn't have a rear-facing camera, so I've literally got to shine the iPod on the card in order to film it. It's a little annoying, but I hope it's not too aggravating for anyone viewing the video. Next, first up for the non-creature spells, 3 Galvanic Bombardment for 1 red. It's just a really good early removal spell for getting rid of a lot of the early threats that your opponents are throwing at you. It's good against a lot of the aggressive decks that are in the meta right now. Red-white vehicles, red-black vehicles, green-white humans, ban humans. It's just a really good early removal spell for 1 mana. So it is a 3 of in the main board. And of course, casting multiples of these just makes it that much stronger. So, yeah, super good. Next up, we have a playset of Harness Lightning. Just a really good value removal spell, and it also is able to fuel my Aether Hubs with any excess energy that I may get from it. So it's, again, a super good early removal spell. It is a full playset in the deck. Next up, 2 Immolating Glare. Just a really good catch-all for a lot of the aggressive decks, or even for the mid-range decks. There are situations where I'll be playing a mid-range opponent, and they'll have like one big fatty out that they're willing to swing in with, and when they do, done. I get rid of a lot of things like Gear Hulks and Eldrazi with this card. So yeah, it's a 2 of. Destroy target attacking creature for 2 mana, instant speed. Next up, 1 Deckenstone. The reason it's only 1 of is it's really good against any of the dredge strategies that you may face. You really want to exile their prized amalgams, or their haunted dead, or their scrappy scroungers. The name of the game against dredge is exile. That's really how you beat them. That's how you slow them down and prevent them from doing what they want to do, which is get their scroungers or their haunted deads out of their graveyard and get their amalgams on the field for free. So it's a 1 of. I don't normally like to play too many of these because I don't like giving my opponent a lot of card draw. So it's only 1 of in the main board for the reason of facing dredge. Next up, 1 of Skyweather Shot. It's good for catching a lot of the bigger threats that your opponents have, but it doesn't catch everything, so it is only a 1 of. But when I need it, it's nice to have it. But when I don't need it, it's just a dead draw. So there was a situation last week where my opponent had nothing, and I had this in hand. This was the only card I had in my hand. They were and they were able to swing in with their Needle Spires and win the game, and I couldn't do anything because Needle Spires is just a 2-power creature. It turns into a 2-power creature, I should say. But yeah, for 3 mana, destroy target creature with power 3 or greater and scry 1. It is good for getting rid of things like your Hulks and Kaliduses and Voldaren Pariah, I believe it's called, the big mean madness vampire that the dredge decks like to play as a capper for their mana curve. So yeah, it's a 1 of. Next up, a card that I really do like, Stasis Snare. It gets rid of all of your opponent's threats. The first time I ever cast this card was at Battle for Zendikar pre-release. I was able to Stasis Snare my opponent's Ulamog, which made me feel really good. And I've really liked this card ever since. For 2 white and a colorless, it's an enchantment with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you exile target creature and opponent controls. So it's really good for breaking up a lot of people's combat math. They'll swing in, and I'll Stasis Snare their biggest creature and maybe double block their next biggest creature. And next thing you know, they have an empty board, and I still have one of my threats. It's just a really good combat trick, really good instant speed removal. Gets rid of Emrakul, which we all know is super relevant in the current meta, with him running around in a lot of the Marvel decks and the Delirium decks. He can be really aggravating, but Stasis Snare is a good answer, solid answer. So it is a 2 of in the main board. Next up, 2 Cultist Return. Good mass removal for weak creatures. He's two colors, 1 red for instant speed, devoid spell. It deals 2 damage to each creature, And whenever you cast an Eldrazi creature spell with card mana cost 7 or greater, you may exile it from your graveyard, and if you do, it deals 5 damage to each creature. So it's a good early game catch-all, and it's a good late game semi-board wipe too. It gets rid of most of your opponent's threats. It's just really good master removal for a lot of the more aggressive decks in the current meta. I'm able to flash him back with Worldbreaker, which is also relevant. Next up, 2 Chandra Torch of Defiance. Chandra really hasn't found a home in Standard yet, but she really deserves to have a home because she's a super good card and she does a lot of work for me. She's very good. So yeah, for those who don't know, 2 colors, 2 red for 4 loyalty Planeswalker. Exile for +1 is exile the top card of your library. You may cast it. Sorry, does it say cast? Yes, you may cast it. That is relevant because if it's a land, you can't cast lands. You may cast the card. If you don't, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Her other +1 is add 2 red to your mana pool. And her -3 is deals 4 damage to target creature. And her -7 is you get an emblem with, whenever you cast a spell, you can deal 5 damage to target creature or player. I've ultimated her twice in the 3 events that I've played so far, and you win the game within a turn or 2, typically. So she's a 2 of. Next up, we have Nahiri the Harbinger, another very good Planeswalker. She's a red-white 2 colors for 4 loyalty. Her +2 is you may discard a card if you do draw a card. It's not mandatory. You can just +2 and decide not to discard. Her -2 is exile target enchantment, tapped artifact, or tapped creature, which is relevant with all of the artifacts floating around these days. In the case of Aetherworks Marvel, they do get 1 activation because it has to be tapped, but still very relevant and a very good ability, very powerful ability. She gets rid of your opponent's stasis snares, or if any of them are running any of the Oath cards or any of the other good enchantments that are in Standard right now that are seeing play. And her -8 is search your library for an artifact or creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It gains haste. Return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. Originally in this deck, I tried Emrakul, but he was really clunky, and he wasn't a card I ever wanted to draw. And I just found that -8ing to get a Gear Hulk is also super good, and more often than not is good enough to win you the game. In early testing with the deck, in the few occasions where I was in a position to get Emrakul with her -8, it was really just a win more. If you're able to protect Nahiri enough to get her up to her 8 loyalty, typically you're ahead enough on the board already that Gear Hulk is enough to win you the game, or to carry you over the top anyways. And they're a lot less clunky to draw. So yeah, her -8 is super good. She's a 2 of in the deck. Next up, we have 1 of Arlinn Kord. Earlier on in the deck, I had 2 Arlinn Kords, but I found there were situations where there were better things that I could draw. But she is really good with Sylvan Advocate. She synergizes well with Sylvan Advocate. She synergizes well with Needle Spires. If you're able to activate the Needle Spires and give it +2/+2 Vigilance Haste, that's super good. So yeah, I'll explain the card. She's a flip blocker also. So for 2 colors, green and red, she enters with 3 loyalty. Her +1 is until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2, gains Vigilance and Haste. Her 0 is to put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield, and then you transform Arlinn. And she turns into Arlinn, Embraced by the Moon, which has a +1 ability, which is creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. She has a -1 that bolts creature or player, and then she has a -6 that says you get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, and you can tap them, and it deals damage to target creature or player equal to the power of the creature. So it's super good. I've only ultimated her twice ever, and not just since I started playing this deck. Mainly because I typically alternate between the +1 and the 0 ability on this side, and then after I 0 to get the wolf, I typically start bolting things, or I'll ambush by giving all my creatures +1/+1 and trample. But she is super good. She's very versatile, and she doesn't see as much play as I think she should in Standard. She's very good. Yeah, she's synergized well in this deck too. So I considered keeping her as a 2 of, but there were just other cards that I felt were more necessary in the deck. Finally, the last two planeswalkers, a two of Nissa Vital Force. She is super good. 3 colors, 2 green for 5 loyalty. Her +1 is to untap a land, and it becomes a 5/5 elemental until end of turn. It's still a land. Super good with Sylvan Advocate. There are several instances where I had a Sylvan Advocate out, and I +1'd her, and people didn't realize that the land was now a 7/7 and not just a 5/5. That was super relevant. If you're being honest with your opponent, you should point out immediately that it is a 7/7 and not just a 5/5. But really, in a competitive situation, it's up to them to really realize that. Her -3 is return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, which is, again, super relevant with all the powerful creatures and planeswalkers that were running in this deck. And her -6 is you get an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card, which is just great for late game card advantage in grindy matchups. She is a 2 of. And finally, last but not least, 1 of Chandra Flamecaller. 6 mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker. +1 is to put 2/3/1 elementals out, and they gain haste and exile them at the beginning of the end step. Her 0 is discard all cards in your hand, then draw that many +1, which is good for card filtering. And her -6 is just a great, it's a board wipe. Basically, not a full board wipe, but she gets rid of most of your opponent's threats, especially in the aggressive go wide decks that you see a lot of in Standard right now. So that is it for the main board. Sideboard, of course, sideboards are semi-fluid depending on your meta, but this is the collection of sideboard cards that I have put together for my local meta. First off, just the 4th of Galvanic Bombardment for a lot of the aggressive go wide decks. It's a Radiant Flames, but this can be Radiant Flames or like a Kozilek's Return if you have one. This just does the extra point of damage, so I find it can be very versatile in getting rid of things like the Depala decks. A lot of times you want to get that extra point of damage. 2 more Deccan Stones, bringing them in against the Dredge decks. 1 Linval, Preserver for the aggressive go wide decks. Getting an extra body and getting 5 life is super relevant. 2 Fumigates for the same reason. 2 more Stasis Snares for any of the mid-range creature decks, and also for the Dredge decks because, it's exiling, so you want to get rid of those Prize Amalgams or the Scroungers or their Haunted Deads, and Stasis Snares there for you. 2 Fragmentizes and 2 Appetites. This is also depends on the meta. Really, if you want to have more Fragmentizes than Appetites, that's fine. Like if you want to have all 4 Fragmentizes and no Appetites, or 3 Fragmentizes and 1 Appetites, it really just depends on your local meta. I am a 2-2 split because I have people at my LGS that like to play things like the Sky Ship, the flagship Sky Sovereign, which Fragmentize doesn't do anything to, so I like to have an answer for that. And finally, for my sideboard, 2 Gideon Allies Zendikar, because, you can't run white and not run Gideon. He's just super good. Super big. He's a big threat. He demands an answer. And, he's super good. So he's a 2 of on the sideboard. And I never don't like casting him. He's always good for me. He can win the game single-handedly. And he puts up multiple threats. And he makes all your other threats bigger. So, he just does all the things. So that's it for my Naya mid-range Planeswalker deck. I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to comment on things that you liked or didn't like, or things that you would do differently, or changes that you would make, or cards that you would consider putting in the deck. Again, this deck has been really good for me. I thought I went 12-0 with it, but I actually looked up my results on the Wizards of the Coast website by looking up my DCI profile, and I did lose the very first game of the first Standard event I took it to. It was a very close game against the Dredge deck, but I've won every match since then, and I've had a lot of fun with the deck. It's been super good, and it's been especially fun because my matchup is really good against a lot of the bigger decks on the meta that annoy the heck out of people, like the Aetherworks Marbles and the Delirium decks. It holds its own against those top 2 decks. So I highly recommend you try this deck. It's super fun, and Will point out one of my favorite plays in this deck, though, is if you have 6 lands, a Sylvan Advocate, and a Nissa out, and one of your lands is a Needle Spires, you can swing in for 19, which is, I've ambushed a couple of opponents really quickly by doing that. They're like, whoa, I didn't expect to get smacked in the face for 16 there out of nowhere. And it's like, yeah, nobody does. Nobody does. It's a really good ambush aspect, and it's another reason to have Arlen Cord, because if you have 6 lands out and one of them's Needle Spires and you have Sylvan Advocate out, you activate your Needle Spires plus 1 Arlen Cord, and bada bing bada boom, you got a 6/5 double strike swinging in, which is brutal. And even on her flip side, she can give +1/+1 trample, so you got a 3/2 double strike trample coming in, which is a pretty formidable threat on its own. So yeah, Sylvan Advocate and Needle Spires are super important in this deck, and they synergize just fantastically with each other, obviously. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Feel free to comment, like, or subscribe to my channel, and have a wonderful day.